Happy Wednesday. Good to see everybody. I'll give everyone a moment to get connected. We know it takes a little bit of time. It's so good to see your faces. I recognize some of you from the first of the series that we had a few weeks ago. My name is Anissa Mitchell and I'm with PMD Alliance, and I am happy to have you all come back for the second in our 4-part series in the art and practice of planning. And today we're going to be discussing asking for help. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few things with you. This program is a little bit different than some of our other live streams because we want it to be much more interactive. We want you to ask questions, and you can do that either through the chat. So if you want to go ahead and open up your chat box and let us know where you're coming from, you can chat your questions that way, but we also are interested in hearing from you directly. So as we go through this first hour of presentation, we would love for you to just ask a direct question. So if you would like to do that, the only thing we ask is because we expect a fairly nice number of people joining us today. We may not be able to see all of you. So if you would just raise your hand by using the, I guess it's the reactions, then that will help us to know that you want to ask a question, because can't always see everybody physically raising their hand. So feel free to do that, or you can chat and say, hey, I want to ask a question, Anissa, and I'll call on you. The other thing is, right now for me, the live transcription is up, and sometimes that's a little distracting. So if you like that, then you don't need to do anything. But if you want to eliminate that, if you go over to where it says live transcription, and you pop up that little box, it'll say hide subtitles, and that will make that go away. So that is one major thing that I wanted to go through. The other thing is, if you registered in advance, not just a few minutes ago, you should have gotten an email that had the link to this program, but it also had some handouts. So I just want to point out what the handouts are. We had some in our last one called Planning for the Future. We included those in the email for today's program because some of the information that we're going to be reviewing today, it kind of goes along with and builds on that Planning for the Future information. And there were some resources on that one handout. There was also the Caregiving Action Plan, and that gives you a chance to kind of write things down as they come up. You're like, oh, I really need to deal with that. And then kind of set yourself a goal and a date to do that. I know for me, if I write it down, I'm more likely to do it. So we invite you to utilize that. The other handouts that you would have gotten in the email, and you will get, if you didn't get that email, you'll get a follow-up after today's program, and we'll have the attachments to that email. So don't fret if you didn't get them. But the one I want to point out first is this one. It looks like this, and it is the Temperature Check Care Partner Burnout Assessment. Now, I know that our audience today is made up of care partners and adult children, as well as persons with Parkinson's. This is more geared towards the care partner and adult child, and it is something that you could do on your own time. And we do want you to utilize this to kind of be honest with yourself about where you are in your stress level, because that is what we're going to be referencing today. So feel free to use this. You don't have to share it with anyone, but I do want to point out that it is kind of like a thermometer. And if you're in this phase where it's orange to red, that tells us there's some stress in your life and maybe you need some help. And so we're going to be addressing that today, hopefully. But one of the things I wanted to point out is that if you are there, feel free to reach out to us, but you're probably also going to need to reach out to some other resources like your physician, because you're likely not going to be able to manage your own health, which will impact your loved one. You should probably speak with a counselor, a social worker on your healthcare team if you have one. Definitely join a support group. So those are just some of the things that you might want to do if you're on that part of the temperature gauge. The other thing is the asking for help handout. It looks like this. This is really informational, more to kind of go along with the material that we're going to be talking about today. Now, the last time we did do a breakout session, and I will let you know that we are going to be doing a breakout session again today at the end of the hour, at the top of the next hour. So I guess it's 1 o'clock if you're Pacific time. And this is just a short 15-minute breakout. Consider it kind of like a mini support group, and we're going to have a discussion question. I know some people at the last program were a little confused. You will get a pop-up, I believe, that tells you you're going to join a breakout room, and you can click join, and that will automatically take you to the breakout room. You don't have to do anything. Will automatically assign you, and then it'll automatically bring you back to the main room when we're done. So you don't really need to do anything other than click that button when it pops up. And we hope that you'll do that. The reason we're doing it for these programs is because we feel like some of these topics really benefit from having additional discussion and with one another. So we invite you to do that. So I want to introduce to you our speaker today, and that's Erin Cecchi, and she's a clinical social worker who serves as a senior program coordinator at the Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorder Center at Northwestern in Chicago, another fellow social worker, and I'm excited to have Erin with us today. Thanks for joining us, Erin.
Yeah, so great to be here and so great to see all of you from across the country. I saw some people from the Midwest who are also on, but so great to be part of a program that's nationwide. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we dive in, I wanted to do a poll question. And before we start that, we are partnering with Kyowa Kirin, and they did a study of 695 care partners. And it was interesting what they found in their study, and it helps us to kind of frame some of the conversations that we're having that we feel are really important. And of the 695, they found the care partners were spending an average of 45 hours a week of unpaid caring of their loved one. And the key tasks that they were spending the most time on was providing emotional support, attending or managing doctor's appointments, transportation to appointments, and then helping with memory. And so we know that that's a lot of time. It's a lot of task. It builds up over time. And therefore, that is when people might start feeling that stress and strain. So we would like to start off and kind of find out where our participants today are in terms of getting help. Who's asked for help? Do they have it regularly? Sometimes on occasion, I've not asked for help, or I don't even know where to get help. So if you could do that poll and kind of let us know where you are. Okay, I'll give you another minute. And what I mean for asking for help is assistance with anything. It can be from, somebody doing the yard work if you're unable to do that as the care partner, or if you're somebody who is living alone and doesn't have someone that's living with them as a care partner. It could be helping with transportation. It could be physically helping in the home with, cleaning or even personal care. And as time goes on, we know Parkinson's is a progressive disease. More help is needed with day-to-day tasks, and whether there's a care partner doing it or you have somebody helping you do it. That is what we mean by asking for help. So it looks like 65% of our people have not asked for help yet. So that is a good starting point for this conversation. So Erin, I'm going to ask the group this, but I'm curious, when you've worked with people, what have you found in terms of barriers for people to getting help? Why are people not asking for help?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think there's a lot of reasons out there, right? You may not want help. You may not know what to do. you might have preconceived notions about what that help will mean for you, that it might just make it worse, or that you don't have time to teach that other person about all the things that you need help with. You may get tired of asking. You may not think that people would actually help even if you ask. So there's a lot of beliefs that we have, some of which may be myths and thinking traps that we fall in, that we kind of talk ourselves out of asking for help. But regardless, the feeling's there. Again, not even knowing what to ask, what kind of help to ask for, or feeling that you don't want to be a bother. I think that is one that we hear repeatedly in terms of this, not wanting to ask for help because not wanting to be a bother, not wanting to impose, or it may just be too much effort to ask other people. You're too busy. You don't have the time, again, to coach these other people. So sometimes, going it alone feels like the only way, when in reality, there might be other options. But again, that feeling that going it alone is just easier sometimes is very prevalent and can really dictate a lot of our decisions. Again, not asking for help being one of them.
And someone wrote, afraid of asking for help because of COVID, which was a real issue, for a very long time.
Which is huge, right? And cost is also, not having the cost to reimburse these other people. But of course, yeah. So certainly in unprecedented times, I'm sure you heard that phrase so many times during the past year, that we're in unprecedented times. And of course, safety was a huge concern. And I heard that so much in terms of caregivers really having no choice but to go it alone, and not being able to ask for that outside assistance in terms of that type of help.
And one person wrote, I feel as though we're not there yet. I would love to know what kind of help to ask for yet. So I know some places are starting to open up like adult day centers. If you are a care partner who is caring for somebody that might have a little bit more needs, and you're needing to get out and do errands and things, and it's hard to take the loved one with them, or they just want to have a break, those types of facilities in some states, not across the board, are starting to open up. That's, I think, the challenge during COVID was that everything was shut down and people weren't going into anyone's home. And so if you had, a companion care provider coming in, or even a family member that was coming in and providing some service or some assistance, they weren't doing that because of fear of infection. And a lot of facilities, if you have a loved one in a facility and they were in there and you couldn't get to them, that was a real issue. That caused a lot of stress and a lot of strain for people, especially during the height of the pandemic. And we all were feeling that, and it was, like Erin said, an unprecedented time. We're starting to see more people feel comfortable inviting family, inviting friends coming in, maybe utilizing home care services again, slowly as people are getting vaccinated. We know a little bit more about transmission and CDC protocol and all that. Again, I think a lot of it's a comfort factor for many people. And one of the things that Karen's survey found was that while a lot of people realized they needed help and they wanted help, their research found 81% experience guilt asking for help. So there's that as a big factor for people not seeking help. And I wondered if, Erin, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, guilt is something that, right? What is guilt? It's a feeling, real or perceived, right? That we've done something wrong. And that could be because we, again, perceived, or that we actually did something wrong. And yeah, and that is also really tied into shame, but shame is so much more because it really affects our worth as a person. And so again, these are tricky, complicated emotions. So I think the first thing when we're dealing with guilt is to really recognize like those feelings, like name it, look at it. I think we know it's there. And so to name it can be really powerful. And just in terms of admitting, like, I am feeling this feelings of guilt. And I think once you put words to it, it can give you a new perspective and you can, do something with it. I think it's really important to be compassionate with yourself. Um, you know, these feelings are going to come and go. Emotions come in waves, they come and go. And it can be really difficult to sit with it, but really be compassionate because guilt is something we often don't want to feel, right? We kind of place it under maybe the negative emotions category. And we will do anything we can sometimes to not feel those negative emotions. But when it's like a boiling pot, like it's gonna spill over if we ignore those emotions. So to name it, recognize, and be curious about it. Be compassionately curious. I think that if we bring compassion and curiosity to most things in our life, it can really help us. So looking for what's under that guilt. Do you have an unmet need? Do you need something? Do we need to maybe shift that our actions align with our values? So in terms of guilt, so just to pause, I know someone just not understanding the guilt that we're talking about. So some people feel guilty about not ask or of having guilt can be so many things, right? You can feel guilty that you're not caring for the person in the way that you would want to. So it can be tied to an action, or it doesn't have to be specific, tied to an action. Or you feel guilty about asking for help. So that's when we talk about, again, not wanting to bother other people, not wanting to be a burden. So as a caregiver, often caregivers feel guilty about asking for help. And that's really right, the purpose of this talk. So when we talk about guilt, we talk about it as kind of a barrier for asking for help. And so what can be helpful is to take, kind of a lens and look at the guilt, what's under it, what's potentially causing it. And again, sometimes we can get into these thinking traps and myths that we tell ourselves that no one wants to help me. Well, is that really true? If my friend asked me to take them to a doctor's appointment, I would be glad to do that. So sometimes, again, we get stuck in our thinking traps and it kind of prevents us from taking the next step of asking for help.
And Erin, did you sometimes find that part of guilt is fear and shame based? Like, and you kind of referenced it. I'm fearful maybe of asking for help because, and I know some people have felt this, some people might think it's crazy, but I've heard other people say, because people will judge me for not doing my job as the care partner, or I fear that someone's not going to take care of my loved one as well as I would, and something's going to happen. Someone wrote, I don't want to hurt my husband's feelings. Well, that's kind of a fear also, and a concern that if you get somebody else to come in and be with them, that's going to hurt their feelings. That's a fear. Or maybe even there's some shame in wanting to ask for help. And we often frame these statements to ourselves around things like should, must, ought, always, never, that rigid thinking. I should always, be the one caring for them. It must be me. I, ought to want to do this all the time. Whatever those statements, they're very rigid and they back you into a corner. And then that's when the stress level goes up. Even if you're single, you can do the same thing. If you're flying solo and you don't have someone, you might think, well, I'm independent, I should be able to take care of myself, or, I must be able to do these things because if I reach out to somebody else, they're going to think that I'm weak, or whatever the feelings might be associated with it. And like you said, putting it under that lens, is this true? Is it helpful to you to have that? Is it helpful to your loved one if you don't get help? If you wear yourself down to the point where your own health deteriorates and then you're not available to help them because of your own health issues, is that helpful? So there's a lot of negativity associated with getting help. Whereas if you ask for help or you planned it in advance and had this discussion with your loved one about the reasons why, I think they would understand that, everybody needs a break once in a while, including you. They might need a break from you, actually. Occasionally, you might think that they do want you there, but sometimes it's good to have a moment apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, when we're, kind of talking about asking for help, we're talking about building a team. And, if you're a very independent person, being part of a team, does not inherently make you lose any independence. So asking for help and being independent, those things are not mutually exclusive. You can absolutely still be very independent and still ask for help. And Anissa really, I said this perfectly in terms of, again, sometimes we fall into these thinking patterns. And again, we're human, of course we're going to, but I think it's really important to pause and kind of gently challenge ourselves. In terms of, one person mentioned not wanting to hurt their husband's feelings. Well, I would gently challenge, well, what about you sharing your emotions, like inherently is going to hurt the feelings, right? If we can do it in a very respectful and thoughtful way. And it's not the message, the underlying message is not your burden. It's, I need help. I care about us, I care about you, I care about me. And so for these reasons, like, here are the steps I should take. And again, not to make light of this, these are not easy conversations to have. And that's why we're talking about it. That's why we're having these deep discussions about asking for help, because these are not easy things to do. And there are a myriad of reasons, again, that we haven't asked for help. And some are probably very protective, right? We may have been burnt in the past by asking for help. And so I think just to acknowledge and validate that if you haven't asked for help, again, we're human, and that's why you're all here, is to be curious and kind of start thinking about, okay, what would that look like? How could I ask? And that's, again, the basis of this conversation.
Absolutely. And I love that Catherine wrote in, I agree, some of the reticence about asking for help is the feeling that others would not take care of my husband as well as I could. When I went through a total hip replacement surgery last month, our son came in to help, excuse me, and lo and behold, the world did not fall apart. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we hear this all the time, and right, maybe there is like a tiny nugget of truth in that they're not going to care for the person that we're caring for in the way we would. But can we teach them the basics to, to feel comfortable and confident? And again, we can, again, kind of gently challenge, do a little cognitive behavioral therapy on ourselves, which is a certain techniques to, kind of challenge our thoughts and behaviors. Well, what would the worst case scenario be, and kind of play that out. And of course, there are some worst case scenarios, especially when we're talking about, caring for people who have progressive neurodegenerative illnesses, but the likelihood of these things happening. So I think it's also, important to kind of, yeah, maybe they won't take care of them. Maybe they'll get a pill at 101 instead of right on the dot at 1. But what is the cost benefit of me being able to take that break, and kind of recognizing and giving up a little of that control, which again is not easy to do, especially when we've learned our patterns of operating since we were children. So these things are not gonna, and now we're put in this context of a caregiver role, some of which we're thrust into. So there's more complicated feelings. So it's, again, as you can kind of see, there's all these layers, and we bring our own histories to every situation. So it's really important to be, again, very gentle and kind, and know that these things and patterns are not going to necessarily happen or be broken overnight. And again, there's help for all those different parts that we're speaking of, which we can get into in a little bit in terms of what those resources are to help you ask for help, to prevent burnout, and to get the support that you need.
And I think sometimes part of this issue with asking for help isn't just a guilt thing. It can also be a bit of a denial thing. And denial isn't necessarily just a full-fledged denial of the situation. You might really understand that you're the person with Parkinson's and you might need help, or your loved one, his needs are progressing and you finding yourself doing more and more, and you can feel the pressure, and it builds, and you need help. But I think denial can show up in maybe a minimization of how stressed you might really be, or how much help you really need. And someone wrote in, my sister visited for a week and it was a huge red flag for me that I really do need some help. It's not that you were in denial that, this was going on, but sometimes it creeps up very slowly, and we can easily justify in our little minds, oh, it's not that bad. Well, that's minimization. That's a form of denial, and that really can cause stress too. Not really recognizing how much the scales are tipping, on you, where you're taking on more and more. I mean, it's a progressive disease, and the needs increase. And I use this analogy, and it's kind of funny. And I actually use this analogy in referencing like how much things have impacted us over this last year and a half with COVID, and we think we're doing great, and managing really well, until we get out in the real world, or something like having somebody come in and actually help us shows us how much stress we were really feeling. And it's the analogy of wearing your stretchy pants every single day because you're not putting on your normal clothes, and you don't realize that over this last year and a half you put on a few pounds and your real clothes don't fit the same way. Because when you look at yourself, you might see the same person. I don't look any different, but I put on this clothes. Obviously, is there a change happening, and it's creeped up on me, and it's like, wow. So I think that is another thing that we can talk about, is just how much of this also is just us going about life and not even realizing how much help we really need.
Absolutely, right. I mean, and again, not knowing, everyone has such a unique caregiving experience, and they all start at different points. Sometimes it would have started after a hospitalization. Sometimes it's gradual, and you increase the hours as you go. So everything is so unique. And so, it might not necessarily, you could also think about it in terms of like coming to terms with your role. And part of that is, I think, really doing a self needs assessment. Where do you begin? What do you need? Do you need education or information? And do you need that on the person that you're caring for condition, or do you need more skill-based education, coping, problem solving, communication techniques? Where do you begin? Do you need support? Does that support look like emotional support, practical support, financial support? Do you need some self-care? So I think, when we're talking about coming to terms, and potentially being in a place where, we might not be fully aware of the amount of help we need, I think having a really, good self-assessment and asking yourself and writing it down, or having a conversation with a friend or a social worker or someone in your inner circle to say, I don't know where to begin. Okay, well, what do I need? Again, education, support, self-care. So that can be a really helpful place in terms of coming to terms. Like the person, mentioned their sister visited. They didn't know how much they needed that support until it was there. So it was kind of like this revelation. And so just to piggyback and be really, thoughtful about, okay, what are my needs? What are the needs of the person I'm caring for? But what are my needs as a person, as an individual, also as a caregiver? But I think that's also important when we talk about these caregiving conversations. That's just one of your roles as a caregiver, right? And so I think it's important to think of you as a person outside of this role as a caregiver. And even if you identify as a caregiver, maybe you're not there yet. And that's okay, right? We don't need to necessarily identify and label ourselves in order to, perform the duties. So again, it's being, again, I think, compassionately curious with what you need. And then again, I know the last webinar kind of went into some of that, where to go for help, but we can also kind of unpack that as well, because again, a lot of people are caregiving alone. And so what resources are out in your community? What internal resources can you build to help support you in your role?
And in the handout on the last page, exactly what Erin was just speaking of was a little opportunity here, a little worksheet for you to write down, what type of support you need. And it was such a good point to say it's not always physical, tangible support for your loved one or for yourself. It could just be emotional support, or just education. So identifying what that is and the tasks that you need with and where you can start. So I had gotten a private message directly. And I think that this kind of ties into some of that guilt feelings, and certainly can be stressful. Is this person wrote that they're dealing with their mother scoffing at them for seeking care partner support, since they think it's part of being a spouse and you shouldn't complain about it because she had done all of her dad's caregiving on her own. What do you say to something like that, Erin?
Yeah, I mean, I say that this is why groups and education programs like this exist, because whether we like it or not, some people in our inner circle are going to lack the capacity or lack the willingness to be curious and understand. Right. And so this is a real fact. But I think, and I think to acknowledge the emotional impact that that has on you is important as well. That can be really hurtful to hear, because your feelings are valid. And while we would like other people to validate them, we know that they're just unfortunately not always going to be there to do that. And so I think for people, especially, and it's especially harder when it's the person that you're so close with and tied to and caring for, that they're not able to provide you that validation. And some people aren't able to provide validation because maybe they're cognitively not able to as well. So that's a real possibility as well. And I think that begs the importance of getting involved in education in groups like this. I mean, PMD Alliance has so many programs, and likely and hopefully there's programs in your area, whether it be support groups, whether it be individual therapy. There's kind of a funny saying that so many people go to therapy because the people in their lives won't go to therapy. And it's silly, but there's truth to it. So I think that sometimes we do need other coping strategies and coping supports to help us. So I think for that specific situation, which I'm sure is not wholly uncommon, I think it's really building up those other emotional supports.
Yeah. Another person wrote in, and this is a really good point, when we talk about different cultures and how they handle this. This person wrote in my country, children help their parents, no asking needed. However, having raised them here in the US, they turned out American. I help my parents, yet my children do not help me. Anyone else have these cultural differences and expectations? And I do know that there's a lot of different cultures that is part of it. Like it's expected that anyone in the elders are going to be cared for. And we don't necessarily have that mindset as much in the United States. What have you come across in this, Erin, in your work?
Yeah, so I mean, it's certainly situations that present itself, and unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand to kind of to change that. And but there is this very Americanized, independent, right, pull herself up by her own bootstraps mentality that I think sometimes is a little flawed. In kind of thinking. So it's hard, right? When you grew up one way and there's a little bit of a culture clash. I think depending on your family unit, having an open and honest conversation about that, or again, this is why we're having this, because sometimes the family support is not the strongest layer of support for you, and that's okay. And again, to acknowledge the feelings and emotions that come along with that. But sometimes, trying to force that is not going to help the situation. So let's see what other supports in the local community. A lot of times, spiritual communities, your aging community. If there is a disease specific community that you're a part of, I mean, those can be great, great ways. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's a generational attitude someone mentioned. So it's just the approach of it's your mindset. Um, and so I think, having open and honest conversations within a family unit can be helpful. But again, sometimes not always possible.
And I've come across many families that I've worked with in the past where the adult children just didn't get it, either because they were dealing with their own emotional reaction to their parent having the disease, their own emotional reactions to whatever is going on, and they just couldn't bring themselves to meet their parents where they were and their needs. And despite the parents' attempt to educate them, there was still this pushback. So they went and looked in other resources, but then they were able to at least talk to them about the feelings and have those open discussions. And that's all you can do. You can't control what somebody else chooses to do or not to do, but you can be open and honest about what your needs are and not feel guilty about that. And also, it's an opportunity to think outside the box of, okay, maybe they're not going to come over and do the kind of help that you think, but maybe there's other things that they can do that they're comfortable with. Maybe it's helping you with managing something online that's not your skill set, that they're good at, and just finding what their willingness and their skills are and seeing if they will meet you there.
Yeah, and I'm just noticing some people in the chat, just in terms of meeting people with where they're at. It seems like there's a shared experience of people, again, not, it's like we're not even talking about you being in denial, but maybe your friends and family and your support system being in denial, and some minimization about how difficult or what that experience is for you, and to shy away from you. And I think, and again, you have to really assess kind of your relationships with people, but I think it's important. It could be as simple as, hey, I want to discuss something with you. It's really hard for me to bring up, but I also think it's really important for me to talk about. I'd like to share with you like the impact that this is having on my life, and all I need you to do is listen. So you're really setting the stage for the conversation, and in terms of sharing where you're at and what you want, I just need you to listen. Or I need you to validate my experience. I think sometimes it may feel awkward, but in conversations, especially when we're asking for help, being as specific as we can and actually asking for what we need. And that can be really hard because, again, like we said, sometimes we don't know what we need. And so that's where that kind of self assessment comes in. But yeah, I mean, we're also, again, dealing with the minimization or the denial of others in our circle. And so I think that we have to then be thoughtful about, again, how we want to approach that. Do we want to not waste our time because, like, the return on investment, we just don't think it's going to be there? And actually, that's a very protective strategy for us. If you are working with someone who continually minimizes you, don't beat against a brick wall. Don't tell them how hard it is for you. If they're not able to listen, then maybe we need to go somewhere else. So again, it just is, it is really hard to have these discussions. So I think as much as you can, kind of be specific and set the stage, and ask for what you need in that moment. I just need you to listen. I need you. I'm gonna have a list of things I need, and I'm wanting you to pick one or two that you can help me with. And that there's always a chance that they're going to say no. And what if you're no worse place practically from before you ask? So I think, again, these are some things to consider.
Someone wrote in, we find that our true friends are very understanding. And those that are not just they don't see anymore. And I think that's, it's fairly common, whether you have Parkinson's or not. People come and go in different seasons of your life, and everybody has their limits and their own issues. And I know that when you're dealing with something like this, like Parkinson's, and there's changes that they see, it does tend to make people question their own mortality and their own health, and those are often difficult things to ponder. And so people may not be comfortable living in that space, but true friends, if you have them, you definitely, are blessed. And a lot of people find that they make very good friends in their support group, and that becomes their new social circle. And they are a huge support to one another.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, Anissa, so that has happened. I've seen it time and time again. I've seen solo caregivers, and they've been able to, within a support group, connect. And even in the virtual times, they exchanged emails and they became such good friends to the point where one of the care partners, partner passed away, and that other care partner that they met in the group was the second call they made. So how strong of an emotional bond, what a support to have. And so, yeah, it would be great if everyone in our close circle could support us in the way they want, and that we didn't have to ask for help. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of reasons. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think asking for help, I think sometimes there's this feeling of like, well, I shouldn't have to. And yeah, I mean, own that feeling. I think that that's common because, your friends and family, a lot of them may observe you struggling, but there is this, what, again, whether they feel they feel like they don't want to upset you by bringing it up, but again, they have their own thinking patterns and thinking myths that are kind of preventing them from reaching out. So I think, yes, it would be great if we didn't have to ask for support, but sometimes that's just not the place that we're in. And so to say, hey, I want to actually talk to you about me and how I'm doing. Are you in a place where you can talk about that? And ask them and let them tell you if they're in a place where they can actually be supportive. And again, it sounds really awkward, but I think that these are really key ways to set up successful conversations.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about the actual asking for help. You've given some tips, but maybe we could unpack that a little bit, and maybe explain a little bit about different types of supports, because sometimes I think we only think in terms of our immediate family or our friends group, which would be an informal support system. But there are other types of support systems, and some do cost and some don't, that are still considered what we would call formal support systems. So I don't know if you'd like to share a little bit about that, Erin.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about like who or what can help, the list can actually be longer than we think it is. Again, like Anissa said, that informal support, and what we mean by that, right? It's people within your inner circle that you may or may not be paying, but it's the help that you're paying or that you're providing, or it's friends and family lending a hand. So other types of informal support could be, again, faith-based organizations that may, high schools sometimes have to have, right, these high schoolers have to have community service, so reaching out to see, so really getting inventive. There's, again, community workshops, educational forums such as these. There's support groups, which we mentioned. There's skill building groups. There's individual counseling and training. There is family counseling, especially when we talk about these, kind of complicated family dynamics. I mean, these are all types of support because, again, it all begins with that assessment of what type of help that we need. There's care coordination and case management, some of which can be provided out of your doctor's office even. There's a lot of in-home services that, again, sometimes are free or private pay. There's a lot of technology-based information. There's respite. So there are a lot of areas, and again, it takes time to explore, but I think it really begins with, okay, what kind of needs do I want? And then, okay, what potential people could fill those needs? A really, really great resource, I think, regardless of age, is your area agency on aging. So these are sometimes called your AAAs, but every place has it. So it's your area agency on aging, and they're going to have a lot of information in your specific area about what services are in your area, again, for cost or for free, to really help you. So I think that is a great tip in terms of accessing community support. Just Googling, what is your local area agency on aging or AAA, and getting in touch with them to see what kind of other supports are there for you.
Yeah, and really talking to other care partners who have utilized different services and having previously run numerous care partner support groups, I learned more from those people on resources and how to navigate them than I did working with those organizations. And it was amazing, like even the tips and tricks of dealing with things like incontinence and how to get on depends without taking off their loved one's pants while they're sitting on the commode, and they demonstrated it. And it was like mind-blowing, like the wealth of information that other care partners can give care partners is just, it's better than anything you can get anywhere, because they've vetted it, they've lived with it, they're experienced with it. And then Catherine wrote in, are you familiar with the Atlas of Caregiving? We'll fill out a map listing all of your help resources. So thank you for sharing that. And then we got a question, what comment do you have regarding Parkinson's persons and supporters' reaction to declaring themselves to be disabled for Social Security? It's a necessary thing to apply for Social Security disability, I guess. So,
yeah, so in order to receive Social Security disability insurance, that person has to be deemed disabled, which means that person can no longer work, not only at their job, but at any kind of like gainful employment. So it sounds like that's, again, it's a necessary thing to be deemed disabled by Social Security purposes. And again, and some people may be struggling with that label of, again, right, it entails a lot of role changes and role loss, financial loss, like there's a lot to unpack there. But it is a necessary step, and I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, right? This is the place that you're at. You're maximizing your benefits. Speaking of benefits, benefitscheckup.org is another great website to look at in terms of accessing and finding if you're, relying on all the benefits that you can. Benefits Checkup is another great website.
and, again, like a lot of this is finding someone to sit down and talk to and work through this. So if it's not another care partner in a support group, social worker, if you're part of a movement disorders center that has a social worker, if not, you can find them at hospitals and they will often speak with you. Some primary care offices have them. Definitely, if you reach out, like Erin was saying, the Area Agency on Aging, they can connect you to some of those resources. And then last week we had Amy O'Rourke, who is a aging life care specialist, and we provided information on her organization, Aging Life Care Association. You can contact them and they can help you kind of work through some of these resources and kind of consider who your supports are in your situation.
Yep, absolutely. And again, when we talk about support, oftentimes we talk so much about practical support and home support, which is, again, very beneficial. But, it really is that self-care and emotional support for you. So what are your needs? Because as we know, burnout is real, and burnout symptoms really mirror those of stress and depression. And unfortunately, they lead to poor health outcomes, more distress on the part of the caregiver. And it's not all bad, right? There's a lot of rewarding aspects of caregiving too, but I think it is important, and as we're doing, to have an honest conversation about what that caregiver burden or burnout looks like, so that we can take the steps and the measures and really create an action plan for ourselves. And again, that starts with self-assessment and then really honing in on, and again, it can be simple things, right? It gets so overwhelming because, especially if there's so many needs, And this could be because I'm newly diagnosed, a status change, a transition of care. I think these are all good times to maybe, again, check in with yourself to see, okay, where am I doing? You know, that caregiver burnout questionnaire that Anissa shared, you know, to take that and really look and see, where am I on that scale? And if you get a really high score, it doesn't mean that all is lost. It's a red flag for you to say, okay, I'm going to pick one thing to work on, and that's going to be my goal. Because it can be really daunting when, if you're in the red in all those areas, to be like, oh my gosh, I have to pull myself out of all this. Just one tiny step, right? And it's just like asking, it's one tiny ask sometimes that can make all the difference.
Maybe starting with something simple first, so you can
Right.
kind of test the waters
It's
on
like
asking
the
for
door
help
technique,
for
right?
yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, especially when you're making goals for yourself, you know, to go from caring to, I'm going to plan a 2-week vacation, maybe not, but I'm going to hire someone, or I'm going to have someone from my local community, a local high school, a local, you know, faith organization come in, or I'm going to pay someone to come in for an hour while I go grocery shopping, or have a friend come over. Like that can be really, you know, more impactful than you would know otherwise. Like that person said, she didn't know how much she needed help before her sister came for a week and helped out. So again, those little asks, and then building from there. And then it gets your feet wet about, okay, it was uncomfortable to ask, but I survived, right? A lot of the times we build things up on our heads to be worse than they actually are. So there's a lot of coping and self-management techniques to kind of teach us to get through those moments. And again, those can be accessed within support groups, again, talking to other caregivers, going to individual counseling. Those are some great resources, you know, to kind of build your confidence in doing these things.
absolutely. And you hear us talk about the care and support ecosystem at PMD Alliance, which we frame everything we do around. And that is a natural like representation of all of the different things that Erin and I are talking about in terms of your support system. You know, your advocacy organizations like us, your exercise groups, you know, even if it's not a support group, it could be people that you meet in your exercise group, and you network with them and you get to know them, and then they can provide you great information and access to resources. It's, you know, your faith community, you know, not only can they be there for spiritual and emotional, you know, support, but they also often have services for people that can come in and do some help. And some of the larger organizations might even actually have, I know in the area that I live in, some of them have aging life services within the community in their church. And so they provide some volunteer type things. There's also in some communities, I've seen kind of like a, from a lack of a better term, a co-op where, you know, people trade and barter service for service. So you know, I need someone to come over and take care of my yard, and I will do grocery shopping for you when I'm at the store and pick up things that you need. So sometimes trading service for service is a way of getting support if you don't have someone that can actually do, or you don't have the funds for that.
Yeah, and again, when we talk about funding, your area agency on aging is, you know, a good place to start, because again, when we talk about private pay, especially depending on where you live in the country, it is not inexpensive, you know, and I think that's a real concern, a valid concern, right? These things come at a cost, and sometimes they have minimal hour requirements. So I think this is why we're talking about asking for help now. Maybe a goal is to shop around again when we or go, I mean, right, there's caregiver.com, there's these forsitters.com, name leaves something to be desired, but you know, there's these websites, there's different opportunities, and they can, so you can shop around. But again, I mean, it does come at a cost, but your local area agency on aging would likely be able to tell you, maybe some ones that are on the lower cost range, or again, being part of a support group. Oh, this agency worked really good. I actually had this one caregiver specific recommendation. So again, just being integrated in these different areas, which I know takes time and effort, but can really pay off in dividends in terms of, down the road when you're really kind of building this care plan.
So, and I've seen a comment similar to this earlier, and I think we kind of touched a little bit on it, but maybe not to the degree that we shouldn't spend the next couple of minutes on. And that is the care partner's not having a problem asking for help, but their loved one is resistant. They don't like the idea of being babysat, or they don't want to go to adult daycare. They don't want to do these things. And I know you spoke a little bit about just having that honest conversation with them about why. But that can add to the stress of the care partner when they know and want to get, a break, and take care of their own needs, and their loved one was resistant. I don't know if there's anything further you would like to say to that particular issue.
Yeah, and I think, one of the response comments says it perfectly, is to frame it in a specific way, is that it's help for you. They may not like it. It may, it still may leave a bad taste in their mouth in terms of, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want someone I don't know coming in to care for me. And so I think it's also okay, as the person asking for help, to validate that other person's experience. So the person they are caring for, like, I hear you. I'm maybe not like 100% jazzed about the idea too, but I've realized after really thoughtfully thinking about my needs that this is something I need to do for myself, as my partner, as my mom, as my child. I really need your support on this. And so again, it's sharing where you're at, it's asking for specifics. I need your support on this. And they still ultimately, right, may say, no, I'm not comfortable with this. And so it may require a few different discussions about about where they're at and where you're at. So I think in terms of having the conversation, I think it's okay to start with the person who's being, resistant to the idea, to say, tell me, explain to me. Having them explain their situation is not going to hurt. So tell me what your concerns are about having someone else come in, and really dig deep in that, and then just listen and validate, and then say, okay, now it's my turn. So I'm going to share with you why I think. And then this is where the problem solving comes in. And again, it's a lot of patience, it's a lot of validating, it's a lot of going back to square one and saying, okay, I see where you're coming from, and here's where I'm at. How do we meet in the middle? How do we come up with a compromise? And then it may not fulfill everyone's needs in a neatly tied up bow. And so again, these require multiple conversations sometimes. But I think as much as you can to validate and be very authentic with where you're coming from. And I think being very firm with that. I'm not concerned about you. This isn't about you. This is really like a present to myself. And sometimes framing that, again, nothing's foolproof. But sometimes, using that type of language can help.
Absolutely. And having that conversation even with the doctor, because they also see a different perspective of that when you're in with the movement disorder specialist or neurologist. And, they're also, a lot of them now are focusing on care partners' well-being because they need you. And they understand, how valuable your role is. And so they're very supportive of that. So you can often get support from the physician in that. So we're going to break out in our groups here in just a minute. Again, you will get a prompt. You just click that you want to join. So we're going to be asking you the question, kind of to tag along the poll question of, so many of you indicated you hadn't asked for help. So we want to know, have you gotten any help if you are some of the ones that have? If not, why not? And if you have, what type? Who did you ask? What were the barriers that you encountered? You're going to come back. We're going to do a share back. And again, if you didn't get the documents that we talked about throughout this program today, you're going to get a follow-up email. So the first one was that assessment that we referenced, the temperature check, the care burden screen, and then we also have the asking for help. There's some prompts on there and some suggestions on, how to maybe make this conversation a little easier. So we're going to get ready to have Kelly put us into our breakouts, and then 15 minutes, we will come back and have a discussion about it. So hang tight. Kelly.
Me that Benjamin Franklin said that if you want somebody to like you, ask them for a favor. And so, during the course of this, my husband's Parkinson's, my best friend really came forward, and she's always asking if she can do something. And I finally just started saying yes. And and I've had a discussion with her about, I don't want to impose too much. And she said, no, you're not doing it at all. I really want to help. And so, it's, if you don't ask, you'll never know. That's one of the things that I wanted to mention. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is there are people in the group that talked about getting support from like the VA, and the VA is a great source of support. Sometimes it's been just getting a caregiver agency like Home Instead to help out with caregiving just for, a day or, a few hours. And that's been really helpful to them. So I really honestly think that the hardest thing is just making up our minds on, what it is that we need, and then who is in our map of support, like the neurologist, social workers, friends, our family members, the VA, exercise classes, because there's all sorts of things, emotional support, physical support, social support. And one of the things in the beginning of the pandemic that I asked my husband to do is I asked him to call 5 friends every day just to check in on them and see how they were doing. And so he does still. And he, under the belief that he's really checking in on them, but it makes me comfortable knowing that he's feeling valuable to them and he's getting something from it, and so are they.
Awesome. And you are absolutely right. And I love that Denise, and I think she must have been in the room with you, maybe, had said to also ask the PWP what their support preference might be. And you mentioned your friend, but like you said, he was calling several of his friends. Maybe they would be willing to come in and spend time. And it's not necessarily always, babysitting, but like just spending time together, just quality time together. And another comment you made that I would really like to underscore is that people really do want to help. If they've offered it, they don't typically unless they mean it. And we just need to be honest with them what it is we need, and very specific with them what we need. And they're usually very happy to help, and will tell you when I can't do that today, but I can do it another day.
Mm-hmm. True.
So thanks for sharing that, Catherine. And Ruthie said, I learned that there are out-of-the-box resources. Ask cleaning ladies, exercise instructors, or any other acquaintance who may spread the word that you're looking for some help. So even if it's not them directly, she's saying that they might know someone that can be of help.
Mm-hmm.
And also, allowing someone to help is accepting a gift from them, which allows them to feel good. And that's absolutely right. Really good words of wisdom. Now, is there another group that has someone that would like to unmute and verbally share their discussion? I'm sure you guys had some really great conversation in there, and we couldn't be in every room. So we would love to hear what your group talked about. Shy, we got a shy group of people. And Sheila said, our friends are handy around the house and they seem to feel more comfortable providing that kind of help, such as home repair, maintenance, as opposed to direct healthcare provision. And I feel more comfortable asking for that kind of help. Absolutely. It doesn't always have to be hands-on personal care assistance. If you're doing that and they're taking care of home maintenance and shopping and those kind of tangible things, that frees you up to do the other tasks that they aren't comfortable doing. And, that can include, adult children. They're not going to necessarily come in and a daughter bathe her father, but she can do the grocery shopping. She can run the errands, or your son can do things for mom. That's not uncomfortable for either, but it's still very helpful because then it frees up the care partner to do other things, and they're, not as stressed trying to manage all of it. Yeah. And I don't know if you had anything to add. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It just made me realize that was my experience. And I would encourage my group member, Karen Phillips, she might want to share what she shared with us, because she brought in a perspective, and especially it's pertinent to this series, which is called Planning for the Future. And like my husband and I are remodeling a home that we own right now, but I know in the not too distant future, we're going to look into independent living situation. And it was so great for me to hear Karen's positive experiences with that, and how it helped open up time and space, I think, for her to provide care in other ways and some respite. So I'll let her address that, but it's just different side of that coin about home ownership, or as my friend calls it, home ownership.
I like that. So Karen, you want to add to that? And last week we did, okay, she's really, okay, perfect.
Yeah, we have downsized twice. And when my husband was so disabled, that he could no longer do anything around the house, drive, yard work, anything, I realized that we would be better off renting. And in Waco, Texas, there's a independent senior living community. There are 5 of them in Texas, and they're emerald cottages. But I've looked into it around the Houston area and other places. There's almost a boom in building for senior living. Even though we're renting, we have 1,350 square feet, a garage, a front porch, but absolutely no maintenance. And the rent includes cable TV and Wi-Fi and all utilities. But our management has been very helpful in providing optional lunches. We're talking 3 and 4 course lunches, 3 days a week, couple of them a month, sometimes 3 if an outside agency wants to come in and bring something and then give you their spiel on memory care or nursing home or assisted living. A couple meals a month are free, and the rest of them are $10. And they're by caterers, not just, local restaurants, but they're optional. And for $10, that has saved me so much on shopping, cooking, cleaning up, because my husband requires 24/7 caregiving. And anyway, that turned out to be the best thing. And it just so happens they're not part of the same organization, but we're next door to a memory care and assisted living facility, and the other side of them is a full nursing rehab home. So moving to rent, was the best thing that could have happened for us.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that, because I love hearing different experiences people have had that's been helpful. Right. And so, you brought up a good point, even thinking of like ways to get meals where it eliminates the need for shopping. And really it goes back to like margin. We only have so much time, so much energy each day. What are you going to devote it to? And where we get into burnout is when we have no margin. So what are some ways that we can build it in? It's not like we're going to be able to go away on a week's vacation and rejuvenate. So where can we build in those little bits of margin in our life that's feasible and can really help free us up. So thanks for sharing that. And I will say that Lorenzo also talked a little bit about the palliative care model that's really emerging, and we're seeing now in a lot of the larger centers, which really does start these conversations early on, because of the importance of being able to think ahead and to have these conversations with your loved one, with your family members, and really start thinking in terms now what might be needed in the future, kind of going back to that conversation we had last week of, thinking now about planning for the future and then how to ask. And they really support that and really focus on the quality of life, not only with the one who has a diagnosis, but also for the care partners and family. And yeah, just opening yourself up to other possibilities. And I think we've heard some really great examples today of ways that we can think outside the box. And it may not be the answer to every scenario, every frustration, resistant family members, stress of loved ones, not wanting outsiders coming in, but having these conversations and just being honest with where you are with yourself first, and then be able to communicate that to your loved one is the start. So Erin, we only have a couple more minutes. I didn't know if you had anything more that you would like to share with our group today.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, just to notice what this experience today was like for you. I mean, because a support group, I think, is going to be very similar. It won't be as education forward, and there's going to be a lot more dialogue. But it seems like even in those, little 15-minute breakout rooms, I think a lot of great discussions were had, a lot of great resource sharing. So I think just to be noticing how this experience was like for you, and if there's a way that you can seek that out. And again, like we talked about, and like Debbie said, it takes courage, and a lot of it takes a team. And so we're only one person. So really, again, starting, I think, just as a takeaway, starting with self-assessment, where you're at, what do you need, and taking advantage of groups like this, education, lectures like this, support groups in your area, again, accessing, some of those out of the box resources, and really, again, being curious and kind to yourself, and ask for help when it's needed.
Absolutely. Well, Erin, I thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, sharing your wisdom and your expertise. And I thank everyone for their willingness to be vulnerable and honest in these conversations. They're not easy. They're very beneficial and very helpful. And so I thank you for sharing that, your wisdom with one another. It's very meaningful, and we just love getting in those spaces with you and having these conversations. Again, if you didn't get the forms that we referenced before, you will get them in a follow-up email, and then we hope you'll join us for the next conversation in this series, because we're going to be talking about keeping up with the treatments and managing all of that. So this is the next step in like caring is, dealing with the medications and understanding what treatments are available and when is it the right time to adjust doses and those kind of things. So we hope you'll join us for that next conversation. And if we could just give the wave of gratitude to Erin for joining us, and to yourselves for being with us and just getting deep into this conversation. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Erin, thank you so much.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure to join you. And again, really, you should be thanking yourselves for taking the time to out of your day to be a part of this and support one another, because this is what it's really all about. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. You'll all have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.